Life Happens is the podcast brought to you by 87% that helps you build mental fitness. I'm James Gwinnett, endurance athlete and the marketing director of 87%. And in this series, I speak to inspirational people to get their take on life's ups and downs, how they've overcome setbacks, and what it means to them to be mentally fit. This week's guest comes to us via our friends at the purpose-led motivational speaker agency, Speaker Buzz. For more information and their full roster of amazing motivational speakers, visit speakerbuzz.co.uk. We are all about high performance this week. And for my guest, that performance often took place at over 500 miles an hour and several Gs. He is a former RAF fighter pilot. He flew missions for 8 years before joining the RAF aerobatic team, more commonly known as the world-renowned Red Arrows. He flew as a display pilot with practically zero room for error, yet he admits to having failed again and again in the pursuit of success. That's something I'm very excited to explore as we delve into his mindset. I'm very pleased to welcome to Life Happens, Dan Lowes.
Good afternoon, James. Thank you very much. I'm super excited to be here today, so thank you for inviting me over.
No, that's my absolute pleasure. Dan, we are, as you know, a mental fitness platform. And the first and possibly most important question that we always ask guests is, how are you?
Do you know, I'm great. I'm very well, thank you. What a difficult year it's been for everyone, across the board. Freedom's taken from us in a way, detached from families, friends, thrown into there. I left the military and had another job. So added to that, a change in identity / loss of identity. So there's a few hurdles to jump through, but I've spent a lot of time thinking about it, processing it and chasing other adventures. So as we sit here today speaking to you, I feel great. I'm in a really good place. And as I say, happy to talk to you, and day-to-day life's going well.
Wonderful. Delighted to hear it. There's a few snippets you've just mentioned we'll pick up on, but let's go backwards. Let's start at the beginning. Always a good place to start. And in your case, probably particularly relevant because you wanted to be a pilot from quite a young age. You mentioned also that your dad flew, so maybe it was in the blood. But how did you know that was where you were headed, and how did you make it a reality?
In some ways, I was really lucky with that. I was born and grew up in Hong Kong. My dad and my mum had both been in the Royal Air Force. Dad as a pilot, mum as a nurse. That's how they met. But they decided to leave and chase an adventure in the Middle East before eventually Dad getting a job as an airline pilot in Hong Kong. And I mentioned that's where they had me and started the family. So I kind of grew up in an aviation family. It was as you say, it was all around us all the time. I went to a school called King George V School, KG5, which was in Kowloon in Hong Kong, which was right next to what was called the checkerboard, where if you ever see the old pictures of the aircraft, how they used to approach Hong Kong at Kai Tak Airport before it moved, they almost used to come through the buildings and, they do this approach to this, what was called the checkerboard. And at the last minute, they'd bank off down to the runway. And our school was inside that turn. So, I used to sit there in class, just looking out the window, watching these huge, majestic aircraft like dive down, especially on awful weather days where they obviously bouncy around in the turbulence or coming down through the cloud. And it's just something that captivated me. And clearly I heard my dad talk about it a lot. I tell a lot of people Dad used to play a lot of darts in the garden and have friends around the expat type of lifestyle, all the doors and windows be open. I used to listen to a lot of his old friends who had been fighter pilots, and not only just for the Air Force in the Royal Air Force, but also in the Australian Air Force, the Canadian Air Force. And so I heard all these different stories about flying these amazing airplanes. I used to just fall asleep as a kid dreaming about it. Those dreams became a dream when I was awake, and they became a vision. We used to come back in the summer and see the UK-based family, and we go to the odd air show, and I'd disappear back to Hong Kong again with these dreams of one day becoming a fighter pilot in the Royal Air Force. And I look back and think, wow, I wonder what I would have done with another take on life. But I also feel very fortunate for that, because I had one goal, one aim, one commitment. And I think maybe age 5 or 6 is the first time I said that to my folks. This is what I'm going to do.
No university, just this is what I want. This is what I'm going.
Yeah, again, maybe a naive choice at the time, but one that paid off. So it's quite easy, isn't it, to sit here and say, all worked out, believe in your dreams, go for it, don't let anything get in the way. But I was incredibly lucky. And I explain I'll explain why. When I finished college, our school, a great school, St. George's College in Weybridge in Surrey, they had high performing students, and obviously they wanted people to go off and live a full life. But that tended to be the standard route of do your A levels, go to university. And there was two of us that didn't go down that route, or buck the trend, I should say. And there was a bit of pressure, a little bit of, you really should be doing this. I didn't even apply. It's the UCAS system, I think it's called. I didn't even apply to university. And the other girl, Camilla Bainham, who also didn't go to university, she went off to be a very successful chef on private yachts, and she followed her dream. Her absolute passion was cooking. And so the two people that didn't really go the way that maybe the standard route went was because we had a passion from an early age. Now that worked out for me very, very luckily, because I applied for the Air Force and I didn't get in. And so I was coming to the end of my A-level years. University was on the doorstep, and I didn't have anywhere to go. Now that's probably my first real taste of failure. Yeah, I had dreamed since 5 years old of being a fighter pilot in the Royal Air Force.
So how old were you at this stage?
17.
17. So you're 17 years old. Your dreams, as you knew them, shattered. How do you pick yourself back up from that? What did you do, and how did you go through the process of reapplying and some sort of getting the courage back up to go through it again?
Yeah, I had a very frank and open chat with the people that supported me the most throughout my whole life, which was my mum and dad. And we sat down and said, well, what happens now? I'm not in the university selection system. I've messed this bit up, or I've got this bit wrong. What should we do? And I say we because at the time it was very much, my mum was helping me write my CV. My dad was helping me write the application process. They were driving me to the interviews. They were fully supporting everything I wanted to do, and I'd failed. Anyway, we sat down and we decided that it was worth another shot. And at the time, you have to wait a full 12 months before you can apply again. It's just the way the system works. So that was it. And now, as it was, this was just before I was finishing my A levels. So it wasn't exactly a year without finishing A levels and all the rest of it. So I finished my A levels, and by the time I could apply again, it was about 6 months later. And in that time, I got a job as a labourer on a building site, and I was Domino's delivery driver in the evening. Other pizza outlets are available, but that was also a great job, second to be a fighter pilot. And I went again. And this time, I just knew how to prepare myself better. I knew how to conduct myself better. And this is the thing, and it'll be a current thing, I'm sure, throughout this whole chat with you today, is it's not so much the failure that's the issue, it's how you learn, how you react, how you adapt. And luckily, the second time, I passed and got in. And that was it, really. And I made that choice, joined a couple of days after my 19th birthday, graduated as an officer at 19, and went off into flying training. And my point being is, just to finish, to round that square, was I was lucky. And this is the bit where I look back and say, it can't just be down to I'm off to do it, let's make this happen. Had I not then continued to put the effort, commitment in, and also had my fair share of luck, I would have probably failed flying training at the age of 22, 23, which is when I made it to the front line. And that would have been a really awkward time to have come back into Civvy Street without a degree. So I was really fully committed to that process. And so we fail and we learn and we take risks, but you have to understand that the risk you're taking could have a consequence, 4 or 5 years down the line.
And then, so what did the training consist of? Because you mentioned, again, you failed over and over and over. How did you go through the training process whilst failing, but ultimately succeed? Explain how that worked.
For those listening who don't really know flying that much, it's like a Cessna. On the weekends when you see a little white airplane above you with a propeller flying around, that's what you would learn to fly on. And that's what the Air Force learned to fly on, albeit it's a little bit faster. It can do aerobatics and go upside down. It can do low-level navigation. And so some basic military aviation type tests along the way. And at the end of that course, you're what we call streamed, and you're streamed into a fighter pilot training system, a helicopter training system, or what we know as a multi-engine training system, which is like your transport and your cargo airplanes. There's so many amazing jobs in all three of those, but I just wanted to be a fighter pilot. So they're great, but I want to go this way. And so I look back now and think, again, a little bit like they're not going to university. Was I too focused? And luckily for me, it worked out. But at the time, maybe I was, maybe I was too flat out. So there's pros and cons in that, I'm sure. But on that course, anyway, you go through it, and a certain percentage of that course is then sent on to the fast jet world. And I was lucky I went down that route. However, my point being is there's this one particular check ride on that course that is quite a big one, and I failed it. And that was a huge blow for me. I can't proceed to the fast jet world if I failed that trip. Anyway, dust myself off, passed it the very next day, and we moved on. And one thing, that then set me up for the rest of my flying training is the fact that I then understood how to fail. I didn't fear failure because of it. So I prepared myself better. If I did see failure again, which I saw many times, I didn't let it knock me so much, or I didn't let it put me off wanting to succeed again, or I didn't want it to ever put me off from putting myself out there and pushing myself as hard as I could.
And when we were talking before this, you mentioned that people who went through the course at the same time as you did, who sort of flew through it, flew through it, excusing the pun, no problem at all, passed everything. But then actually, when it came to the end of the process, they weren't as good as you were.
To be respectful to them, they were all as good, if not better than me. This thing that you saw start to catch people out was, that course I mentioned, there was another 2 or 3 courses after that before we finished flying training on different aircraft. Every time you succeeded, you went to another course. The aircraft was a bit faster and pointier all the way through until you finished on jets. I failed a couple trips on the next course. I failed another trip on the course after that. Now, every one of my courses, there were people who went through course after course after course with me, for 3.5, probably about 4.5 years, the whole process took, and they never failed a single trip. I was very jealous of that, but they were very good. They could go to bed or go to their rooms at night and study, and they could very much like people who remember names. It's a life skill. They could say a name once and they've got it forever, which I'm very enviable of, and I keep working on myself. But they could read a book. Are you the same?
I lose names very quickly. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I'm Dan. Nice to meet you. They could read a book. But they could do that. They could read what height, speed, angle of bank, power setting, all these things that you need to be an accurate pilot, and they could go out the next day and replicate it. Now, I could pretty much do that, but I probably couldn't do it to the same level that these guys could. Read a book, do it. Takes me a little bit of time. If I read a book, understand the process, now let my hands and feet and eyes see the picture, and I'll replicate it for you. But I need a bit of a go at it first, and away we go. Now, when you're flying fighters, you don't always get a second chance at a lot of that kind of stuff. Now, you do in flying training, but the process is, the fact is, you get a small jet with not a lot of fuel with a lot to get into a particular trip. And if you can't get it in, that's a fail. You can't just go out and say, sorry, I could only take out 50% of the targets because it took me too long to work out how to fly straight level between them all. But that's the kind of mindset behind it all. Now, I was with guys who are winning every course, like best pilot, best at aerobatics, best at low level navigation, best at simulated profile attacks. And all I was winning was, the ones, well, initially the ones you don't want, most improved, the kind of good lad awards, pat on the back. And although one I was very, very proud of, right at the end of my flying training on the tactics and weapons course, which is the final course you do before you go to the front line, I won the reward that was given by the instructors for the pilot they would most want to go to war with. And I've always held that very close to the heart. That's nothing to do with how well I could fly airplanes. The other guys are better at that. But actually the guys that they would want on their wing to go over the ball, I was always super proud of that. But that came from, I think, more my resilience, my planning, my ability to fail and get over it and move on and compartmentalize. Now, the question you asked about, what about these guys who then failed? Now, just to put it into context, some of them did get washed out of the whole system. Some of them just didn't get to fly the airplanes they wanted to fly. And that was because right at the end of this 4.5 year process, when it started getting quite gnarly, I'll give you an example. You would take 2 jets from RAF Valley and Anglesey, up in just outside of Holyhead. You take off, you get given a target in the south of Wales, which would have been a bridge, which you would have to do some type of pop dive attack onto, and maybe do a little reconnaissance of a town and count and see if it's a letterbox or a telephone box in the corner of the village. But it got to a point there where you are going to fail trips like that. They're just hard. And we've seen that, I'll be interested to ask you questions back about your time with the SAS Who Dares Wins program, and how you get tested to a point of there's almost no pass mark in a way. It's just how much can you take before you fail. And it's not as extreme as that at all. I'm not comparing it to that, but there are areas where you're getting pushed beyond certain limits now, and there's no book for it. And so those that didn't have a book to fully go, oh, I've read this, what I should do now is this. That's when they started to find it hard. That's when they started to fail. And unfortunately, some of them hadn't tasted failure before, and they just didn't know how to bounce back from it.
So how does this relate to sort of day-to-day life? Is that decision making? Is that something that can be learned, or is that just, do you personally have an innate ability to make decisions at 500 miles an hour? Or, I mean, what can others take from what you're saying about that the difference between book learning and I don't know, is it life experience?
I think it's understanding yourself in terms of decision making. That is something that comes with experience in a certain area. I would look at a business leader who would say, I'm going to make a decision like this, and I probably wouldn't do that, but that's because my experience in that area is low. Whereas with my experience in flying, I can see developing situations, but I read those across. I think mine are more dynamic in terms of, I could read a dynamic situation. I can see that when I'm driving, or I can see it if I'm on a motorbike. I can see it if I'm in an airplane. I can see it playing rugby. I can monitor speed and work out decisions quite quickly. And I just keep myself as cool and calm as I can. And again, it's probably been a theme, quite a heavy theme already in our chat. Yeah, I don't mind if my decision is the wrong one and I fail. I'll work out very quickly what was the right one and move on.
You mentioned failure, obviously, repeatedly. And that it links to the safety record of the aviation industry as a whole, and how it learns from failure. I read a fascinating book recently, and there was a statistic, I think it was about 10 years ago. There was a rate of one accident for every 2.4 million flights in commercial aviation. Now, that is a staggeringly safe statistic. But again, it's because of the industry as a whole's ability to learn from failure. It's, black boxes, and every single time there is an incident of any nature whatsoever, no matter how big or small, it is debriefed to the millionth degree. And I mean, I suppose that's incredibly important to take away. And again, in life, if something doesn't go right, whatever it is, let's look at it. Let's not just sit and thinking, oh God, I've failed. Let's look at why and work out how we can move forward.
I'm a huge advocate of debriefing. Just to your point on the aviation industry and its safety record, the downside to what is an amazing industry is that when it goes wrong, it can be quite catastrophic. It's all over newspapers. It's all over. Your phone will be bleeping with your news updates of even a small aircraft incident in a far-flung part of the world, when you think, oh right, okay, that's odd. But whenever an aircraft has an incident or a crash, it's world news within minutes. And with that comes reputations, airline reputations, country reputations, all the rest of it. And clearly it's something the world really depends on. And so it's had to get safe very quickly. Now, the aircraft themselves, I mean, they're incredible things. They could fly themselves. There's not, without putting us all down, there's not much going up on the front between takeoff and landing apart from monitoring the system. But clearly you need someone there who knows what's happening to monitor it well. But the point being is these things are within, feet or, millimeters of the height you ask them to level off at. They're within, half a knot of what you want them to be. They're telling you how fast they're really going over the land as opposed to what's happening with the air. They're telling you exactly to the minute what time they're going to land in 12 hours time, 3 continents away. I mean, the equipment that you're sat, all while people are down the back, drinking gin and tonics and watching a movie and complaining they got a little bit of a dry nose because they're up at 8,000 feet. It's
enough leg room in my case.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, match. That's why I sit up the front. In the cockpit, by the way, not in the. But yeah, so the equipment's great, and if you look actually within that amazing statistic of how many accidents or how many people unfortunately are injured during that, it's normally down to human error. So it's an industry that fully understands that the majority of incidents are caused by human error, and because of that, we have so many checks. We have so many check rides here. For example, I'm in the simulator. About 5-6 times a year, where they're failing engines, they're setting engines on fire, a massive depressurization events, or you take off in fog and you lose an engine, you lose control. How you get we're constantly going through the worst case, and that's another thing that plays into it. We never get in the sim, or the simulator, I should say, and practice flying from A to B and nothing going wrong. we're constantly thinking about failures and how we're going to deal with it. And the other part to that is we're very structured with checks. We don't haphazardly go into a cockpit and go, right, I should turn the batteries on. Right, that's some electrics. I need a bit of fuel. I probably should check the weather. It's we have lists and lists and lists of checklists that have been designed by psychologists, have designed by pilots which have all come from lessons learned from some fairly awful air disasters, which mean that we shouldn't do them again. Now, in my experience, being a fighter pilot and also being a Red Arrows pilot, we could never accept the same issue or the same failure, the same mistake, the same error happening twice. So we had a very intimate debriefing system that was very strict, very structured. That meant that after every trip, we had a flow by where we go to the same room, sit in the same seats. We'd talk about what had happened. We'd see everyone's opinion on it. And we'd pull out 2 or 3 things that we were going to immediately fix so that the next time we got on the airplane, which would only be 45 minutes later, we wouldn't make that same error.
Okay, it's very reassuring to hear all of that. That we again, the statistics don't lie. We are pretty safe when we're flying.
You're very safe, and I mean, there's some things. I mean, recently, I don't know if you saw, I think it was United Airlines 777 in America took off and its engine failed. Now that thing's only got 2 engines, and you think, oh, we're in a bit of trouble here. Now that was a catastrophic engine failure, which is pretty striking, pretty alarming. They air traffic, I've watched the video. Air traffic said, come left now and land. And they're like, hey, no, it's all right. We've got some checklists to run. We're fine up here. These airplanes have so much thrust. They've got so much redundancy that, these things can fly for a long, long time on one engine. You wouldn't want to, because why would you? You can land and get in another airplane with 2 engines. Again, the risk it's not a viable risk. But yeah, things do go wrong with airplanes, but sometimes they're just hidden issues. And there's some aircraft have 4 or 5 backup systems to one thing. They're amazing bits of machinery now.
Amazing, brilliant, good to know. Let's come back to your time in the military. So you've passed all the hitting bridges in south of Wales and all of that stuff. Talk us through the following 8 years. Where were you based? Was it overseas? What does your day to day look like? I mean, is there such thing as an average day for a
Yeah, well, that's like everything, right? Everything sometimes becomes average for the people that are doing it. So there was average days, as in what we would do. I was very lucky. I went to the Typhoon. It's also known as the Eurofighter. It's quite famous, I guess, in the UK because, well, I guess people know our equipment anyway. For those who don't, it was the aircraft that raced the Bugatti Veyron on Top Gear. The Bugatti had to do a mile on the ground and the Typhoon had to do a mile in the air. So I was very lucky. I mean, this thing was just incredible. It was at the time the latest fighter aircraft in the Royal Air Force. We now have got the F-35B, but it was the latest when I got to the front line. I mean, this thing was just insane. You could rotate off the runway and almost climb vertically out the field. It would go from 200 to 600 knots in about half a minute. The acceleration was nuts, and you would happily sit at. You could go up to about 55,000 feet and just start to see the curvature of the Earth, and you'd sit there at Mach 1.8, which is 18 miles a minute, not just shy of 20 miles every minute. I mean, it was just, this thing is incredible. Not only that, the human machine interface was fantastic. It was an air-to-air fighter, an air-to-surface with an air-to-surface capability, and it was great. So I got there at 24 years old. But you take one day at a time, one flight at a time, you get better and better. And before you know it, you're a combat-ready fighter pilot. So I did about 2 and a bit years at Coningsby in Lincolnshire. Then I went up to a squadron in Scotland, St Andrews up there, at a place called Lucas, which is fantastic. And again, did another 3 years on the front line there, doing quick reaction alert, intercepting Russian bombers as they came over from Russia, and going all around the world in these major international exercises, working with the Americans and the Australians, and just awesome. And the Indian Air Force, awesome experiences. And from there, I was really, really lucky, and I was selected for what the Royal Air Force called the Qualified Weapons Instructor course, which is our version of Top Gun.
You say you were lucky. I mean, were you chosen out of a group of other pilots because of your track record, or was it just pure luck that your name was pulled out of a hat?
Well, here's the deal. When you pass the course, the 3 things we live by is you're credible, so you can do the job better than anyone in there, or you consistently strive to be the best in the room. You're approachable, So anyone on your squadron or anyone around you could come to you anytime, ask you a question. You wouldn't belittle them. You wouldn't make them feel silly, but you would also have the knowledge that they would require to then go on and further themselves. And you had to be dependable. So they could turn around and say, yeah, that's the boy. Yeah, that's it. And so that's what we lived our life by. And I guess they look at those values in people as they're progressing through. I've been on the front line about 3-4 years at this point. Yeah, I was getting more and more qualifications. I was becoming more respected as a fighter pilot. I was becoming, someone that they could depend on to lead formations tactically, someone that they would not only have as a good wingman, but could lead the formation to do the job as well. And so as they looked across the entire force, they identified 4 of us that they could see as, being worthy leaders, I guess, or worthy of that qualification if we were to go to the course and if we were good enough to pass it. That you don't turn up there and pass that course, I can tell you. It's a bit of a struggle. And so, yeah, I was lucky. I was identified as one of those 4. And in 2013, reported to the weapons school, did that for 7 months. And I was, as I say, again, through hard work, a bit of luck and some dogged determination, graduated as a qualified weapons instructor.
Again, you're being modest. It sounds more like hard work than it does the luck element of it. But let's talk about mindset, because obviously when you're performing at in such extreme circumstances, you can't be 100% focused 100% of the time. So how do you differentiate between that need for that extreme focus for short periods of time, however long those periods might be, and the more, you've called them depressurized situations? That's the word that you've used. What's the difference, and was there a switch in between the two that came on to cause that focus?
Yeah, everyone's different, and in the conversation we had about pressurized moments, you create those depressurizing minutes or two to help you deal with the stress, the focus, all the rest of it. And so I think when we talked, I talked about how we would get ready for, let's say, a show with the Red Arrows. Now, the concentration required to maintain formation positions that close to other airplanes, that fast in such dynamic shapes and maneuvers is high. There's no two ways about it. You can't really switch off at all. There will be moments where you could flick your eyes away and have a look somewhere else, or have a quick thought of self-performance, or compartmentalize a quick debrief what just happened and go, right, that's just happened, let's leave that to the debrief. But in terms of the focus in here and now, it is 100%. So you would report for a brief, which everyone would turn up to at the right time, in the right place, and be fully focused, ready to receive all that information from the leader or from other members of the formation as to how we were going to go and execute our job. There would then be a period, let's say, of 15 minutes between finishing the brief that we then needed to go and get our flying equipment on, or walk out to the airplanes, do the pre-flight inspection, get in the airplane and be strapped in, ready for the radio call at a set minute, not a second sooner, not a second later, from Red 1, and away we went. Now, the intensity of those briefs were full on, because there could be so many different things going on. For example, right, guys, today we're doing the fly past for the Queen over Buckingham Palace. There's, in 2018, there's 90 or 91 other airplanes in front of us, and we have to be 30 seconds behind this particular formation. Not a second earlier, not a second later, not a foot high, not a foot low. We can't. Not only is it a fly past down the mount in front of millions of people watching all around the world, but it's also over Her Majesty, and it's to celebrate the 100th anniversary of the Royal Air Force. I mean, and if the Red Arrows were late, we might as well just land and hand the helmet in. So there's some really intense moments, but then you go, as I mentioned, from the brief to the jet. Now that is a quick time to maybe decompress for a second. And I had a particularly good friend throughout my time in the Reds. I was good friends with all of them, but there was one particular chap who enjoyed. And this is another important thing, actually, as a side note. It's important to understand who you can have these moments with. Some people do stay 100% focused for 100% of the time, and they have the capacity to do that, or they'll release that pressure in another way, in another fashion. Whereas I've always liked having a bit of a practical joke, and that kind of military humor that people seems to be quite famous. Laughing about stuff that we probably shouldn't really find very funny, because it's quite stark. The chances of potentially coming a bit unstuck in the jet and all the rest of it. So we would do stuff, move each other's helmets around. Or, this guy, Smiley, his name is Chris Linden Smith, a top man. we just mess each other around, make sure their kit wasn't in the wrong place at the wrong time, or we go out to the jet and he'd have moved something, so I was distracted by that. So the whole point is to try and make each other late for the check-in, and just that kind of stuff. But the second you put your helmet on, it's a very weird emotional state to explain, really. And we are by no means anything like Formula One drivers or anything like that. But the point being is, I've watched the Drive to Survive, on Netflix, and you watch the drivers. Some of them serious face, get in the car, that's it. Some of them are, like the Daniel Ricciardos, are laughing. They've got big smiles on. They're having a joke with someone. But to a man, if you watch that show, when they put their helmets on and you flick, like just before the race goes, look at their eyes, and I can, as I say, I could understand where they're at, because as soon as we put that helmet on and Red One said Red's check, and we shouted our numbers out down the line and shut the canopies and fired the jets up, and it all starts working for you, right, I'm in the game again. And that's where that 100% focus came.
There's a moment, isn't there? It's very similar, totally different situation, but similar concept. I listened to an interview of a professional rugby player recently, and they have a similar, lots of banter and joking around in the changing room, and they were sort of, stealing each other's kit. But then as soon as that, whistle blows, the red mist descends, and they're on for 80 minutes. And it's not just, I suppose my point is, it's not just if you're an RAF pilot or a professional athlete. It's quite an important lesson, isn't it? That I've just been scribbling some notes, that if you're able to rely on your presentation, if you're briefing in whatever shape or form that might take, whether it be going into giving a presentation to a board or taking a driving test or whatever it might be, if you're able to flick that switch at the key moment and put the focus in, and then come out and decompress and sort of realize the difference between the two, it's an incredibly important life lesson to learn.
Yeah, I think so. And it's being able to compartmentalize, know when it is the right time and know when it isn't, or, not letting other people tell you it's the wrong time if it's the right time for you. As long as you're not affecting their concentration or their game plan or getting in the way of what they're doing, why not have a laugh? Why not be the serious person if that's what you want when other people are having a laugh? Just take yourself away from it for a little bit. There's no right or wrong way to do that. But when you talk about, can you be 100% focused for 100% of the time? I think you can for a period, and then you'll just cliff edge. You'll hit a level where you're just so mentally fatigued that you can't. And so you have to be able to build in these little mini breaks of relaxation, or I like to say it's where we used to decompress. And actually, as a side note, it's one of the common things in aviation is that people would take off, go do the job, and they switch off when they come back. And sometimes that's where, not in aviation, not in commercial aviation, I have to say, but one of the things I saw in military aviation, I fell foul of it plenty of times for myself. We used to have a saying, like, you don't switch off till the engine switches off. And even then you're still on, because it's so easy to go out and fly an amazing trip, have an awful approach or a bumpy landing, or taxi in and get it all wrong, and have a safety point how you don't shut the airplane down correctly or whatever, because you're still patting yourself on the back of how well you've just done a minute ago. And so we'd have a bit of banter, decompress, and then, right, here we go, we're running into an airfield, there's going to be people watching, we need to land in a set way, right, game faces back on, and then taxi in, shut the airplanes down, and then have a bit of a joke on the way back in. And that's how we tend to have this slinky of pressure and depressurizing throughout a single sortie, let alone weeks at a time. It's a very special way to do business.
And it brings me neatly onto because you've had a play with the 87% app. It brings me neatly onto this concept of mental fitness, which is what we see as the ability to navigate life's ups and downs, basically. And it's those. It's the ability to enjoy the positive experiences, but also take on the challenges, and that mindset that actually we can, when you need to focus, when you need to decompress, understanding when those need to take place. What did you take from the app when you went through it?
Yeah, well, first off, I think it's a very nice app to use. I thought, presentationally, it draws you in. Which I thought was great. I thought the way in which the questions were worded and put to the user were very insightful, and I encourage people to. It's probably quite easy to answer it in the way that you would want to answer it, as in, oh, that's me. But I think I would encourage people to use it to be truthful, because that's when you get the most from it. And there was a couple of questions. So I said, do you do something in life untrue? And I was like, actually, no, I do that. Even though I've done it only a few times, I do that. So I went back and rechanged my answer. So I think, and I thought that was a really good option as well, that you don't just get one shot at answering what are quite in-depth, personal, challenging questions. So I would encourage everyone to have a look at it and use it. I'd encourage people to set aside a good amount of time, because you could rush it and not get the benefit from it. And I'd really encourage people to, like me, take the time to be honest with who you are, not who you would like to be, because I'm sure the app will get you to there. Just be honest with it. And so I thought that was great. And there's so many different aspects there. The circle at the end of it, it's 7 sections. Is it? Am I right? I think it's 7.
Yeah.
Yep. 7 segments, and each one of those then giving you advice and tips and some of those great articles that have been written by people to help in each individual area. I thought was brilliant. I'm really looking forward to using that going forward. So yeah, thank you for introducing me to it.
No problem at all. Thank you for those lovely kind words about it. Let's a couple more questions before we do a series of quick fire questions for everyone. But I want to touch briefly on teamwork, because I'm fascinated by the concept of you flying at 500 miles an hour, and if you're effectively your own entity, but at the same time you're having to work as part of a team. How does that work? I'm sort of, this blows my mind. I want to know how.
Do you know what? It's hard. It's hard to explain sometimes, because it's drummed into you from such an early age in your flying training career that you're the captain of the airplane. Like, your number one aim really is to not die. And is to bring the airplane home safely. However, you then need to fit that into a bigger picture. You then need to, that's the very basics of it. But it's bigger than that, because you now need to be a dependable wingman. And that's either on a frontline squadron going off to do a mission, or that's being a number within the display team in the Red Arrows. And so if I just stick to that in a moment, it was my job to start the airplane. It was my job to taxi out. It was my job to take off. It was my job to fly the airplane in a set way, my job to land it and taxi back in. But you're not there by yourself. Our number one aim in the Red Arrows was to be the number one display team in the world. That was it. That was everyone that goes to work. And I'm not just talking about the 9 pilots upstairs and in the other support pilots up there, but I'm talking about the 130 engineers downstairs who work day and night shifts around the clock, pulling out all-nighters on the weekend on these jets if they need to make sure that 9 jets turn up for that display. But every single one of those people turn up so they can be, or the overall team could be the best team in the world. And so you very quickly form into that. So when you're flying, although you're making single seat decisions about what you should do with your airplane, you're doing them with the overall picture of how can that fit into the team and produce an excellent result for the entire team together.
It's obviously such an aspirational and an inspirational section of the RAF, well, not just the RAF, the military as a whole. This world-renowned team. I love the concept that it's not just 9 pilots. There's 130 engineers all running around on the ground, all with this incredible mindset of high performance. How does that come with the history, or is that just sort of ingrained into people as they join the military? What do you think brings that about?
Yeah, I love the armed forces. It instills loyalty, it instills teamwork, it instills that level of service and selflessness in everyone. You work with a bunch of people who go out their way to get better at their own job and promote and build themselves personally to be better at what they do for the greater good of everyone. It's an amazing concept, really, and that is throughout the military. The unit I worked in, the Red Arrows, it had a slightly different tinge to it, because I say we wanted to be number one in the world, and everyone wants to be number one in the world in the armed forces. Sometimes it's down to your kit, down to your tactics, and you just think no one steps out the door thinking they're going to lose. But we had this thing where we were the world-renowned Red Arrows. I think you may even said it earlier, but we've never won a World Cup. We don't have like the Euros. We don't have the Champions League or the Premiership. We don't win a league or get given a trophy every year. So it's a very different aspect to that. We are number one in the world purely based off perception. So, and when I was in the team, there was 55, 56 years of history ahead of us. So you don't want to be the first team in 57 years to not be the best team in the world. And that comes just off perception. I know the British public are very kind. We could go out and probably have a bit of a shocker and everyone would be like, aren't they great? And, pat you on the back.
The public wouldn't notice if one of the aircraft was flying a foot higher than the others.
Yeah, exactly. But I tell you what, they would notice if, 3 guys didn't come back every show. They'd be like, okay, that probably should stop doing that. So we've got that kind of mindset. And so we were constantly keeping one step ahead of our tradition, because no one ever wanted to not be recognized as the best team there's ever been based off anyone's perception. And what that was amazing for is that you just had pure dedication for everyone. And for the engineers, we had this amazing mix of incredibly skilled, talented engineers who'd worked on all different aircraft types in all different scenarios or operations all around the world. But we also took in brand new recruits for 6 months before they went to further training. I remember I was being strapped in by a 17-year-old young girl once who had just joined the Air Force at age 16, had gone through her basic course and was sent to a squadron to do 6 months before she went into her trade training. And she was strapping me into a Red Arrows jet. She was 17. And so that was really cool, because then you get this fresh mix. You get the why. Are you
nervous, or does that make you feel proud to be fostering the new generation of
absolutely proud. There's never once in my life, no matter if it was a 17-year-old strapping me to the ejection seat or, a 45-year-old who'd been up all night fixing a fuel leak. I never once got in that aircraft and thought, this could go wrong, or is that working? I never double checked anything ever. You just had pure confidence and belief that they had done their job, so that your aircraft and your safety equipment was good to go.
Excellent. Brilliant. I'm going to ask one more question before we come on to the quick fire ones, and that's moving on from your military experience. You're now flying in private aviation. You mentioned a loss of identity. I picked up on that phrase at the beginning of this chat. Do you get the same buzz from flying? I mean, is everything boring in comparison? Am I allowed to ask that? Talk through the mental process of leaving the military and becoming more of an average day-to-day civilian.
Yeah. How do I answer that one? I love my job is the first thing I would say. It is very different. It has to be. Now, rather than being that military, right, let's get it done, it's a very soft approach. It's all about the customer. It's all about the client. It's about making sure that people are getting on board at the right time, at the right place. And that's the biggest challenge, which I really love. When people turn up and they want to go and air traffic is saying you can't, or there's an issue, you're like, we can't really seem not to be going anywhere. So how do we get around this problem? So the problem solving of taking this airplane to all these different parts around the world and being on time, on target, I can bring that over from my military life. It is fascinating. I don't fly it 150 feet off the ground or 300 feet off the ground. I don't roll upside down at 5,000 feet at full power and pull through on the light buffet. I don't do all these. I don't race around Wales at low level trying to hit targets. But that initially I thought, I'll be fine with that. Whatever, I'm done. And then I left, and my friends still do it. And so every now and then I see them do their job. And I'm so proud of the guys that are still in and flying these amazing airplanes, do these amazing jobs. And I think, did I tap out too early? But then you have to take a step back and go, actually, I loved every second of that, from 19 all the way through to 35 years old. And I wouldn't have changed a single day. I never did a job that took me away from the cockpit. So every day I went to work, I was pretty much strapped to a fighter jet. I saw so many parts of the world. I worked with so many amazing people. But for me, it took a lot of my lifestyle away. Things that I wanted to do, family. I wanted to see family. I didn't live in a part of the country where I had any family. I didn't live in a part of the country I had much to do with. So I was spending most of my weekends when I could traveling away. And so eventually I realized it got to a point in my life where other things were starting to become more important to me. But I took some time to reflect on it. And although I missed it, I don't now. And I'm just very proud of what I've done. And I've realized that the bits that were bugging me, had I been in there, I've come up with this mantra where I much prefer leaving and missing it than being in, missing, being stuck in, or having that feeling of being stuck in. And there's a lot of people in the military who try and get out. And I've told many of my friends who thought, it looks great. It's like, grass is always greener. Don't ever rush a decision. Just leave when you're ready to leave, but make sure that you don't get yourself to a point where you're starting to lose focus and becoming miserable about a job that you've spent 15 years absolutely loving. Make the decision early, or make a timely decision and move on. And so that's how I've come to peace, I would say, with my decision of hanging my helmet up as a fighter pilot.
A lot of important messages in there, and I think you can be incredibly proud of what you've done. You don't seem to have too many regrets, which is great. Quick fire. We ask these questions to everyone. Set questions. Number one, is there anything that is an absolute non-negotiable that you do regularly to help your mindset or improve your mood?
Sleep. That is, if I find I'm getting grumpy, if I find I'm not making good decisions, if I find people are annoying me, or if I feel that I'm reacting too emotionally too quickly to a decision or a comment, I realize I'm tired. And so my non-negotiable, I don't always make it, but I do try it and have good sleep hygiene. So I give myself a period of the day at the end of the day to make sure that I've shutting stuff down and get myself into all the things that come with a dark, cool room at a reasonable time in the evening to go and get a good 8 hours sleep. And I think that is a huge factor in my mindset.
Very important. What makes you good at what you do?
I believe when I go for something, I am consistent in my approach to it. So I consistently come up with something. I look at how I'm behaving. I look at how I'm performing. I can then give myself a quick debrief and then go again. I don't stop. So I would say when I go for something, the reason I succeed is because I become consistent at it.
Okay, cool. What would you say to a young Dan?
I would say, I would just tell myself to enjoy the journey. You don't know it's going to happen. I know that. So it's quite difficult to say that with hindsight, but just enjoy it. Just enjoy every moment. And at the point you start to forget that you loved it as much as you did age 18, whether that's 25, 30, 45, 50, realize why you're doing it, re-energize yourself with the love for the job, find the stuff that you used to really enjoy, because the stuff that has annoyed me or at times got me down or got me frustrated professionally, if I rewind myself 5 years from that point, I probably would have accepted it and enjoyed that moment. But because I've grown long in the tooth, or I've grown experience in a certain area, or know it should go somewhere else, I would say keep that level of enthusiasm, enjoyment that you had at 19 the entire way through.
It sounds like you've enjoyed it a little bit over the.
I've had a great time. Just wish I was 19 again.
And any ideas, people, things, places, books that you've taken inspiration from recently?
Oh, that's a big one. I'm reading a great book on Why We Sleep by Matthew Walker. I mentioned sleep's quite important. That's a really good one for me. I've taken a lot, and as I say, I've always been a big advocate of sleep. So actually understanding a bit more about the process, on the brain and why it is so important. And the biggest one for me was, we always talk about this 8 hours sleep, and if you only get 6, you lost 25% of your sleep. But actually, when you start to understand the sleep pattern in terms of your non-REM and your REM sleep, you're actually losing in that 2 hours maybe 30-40% of one of the other. By the way in which it biases those over the night. So it's incredibly important to make sure you're getting the full cycle to get the full recovery in your sleep cycle.
It's quite a scary book, though, isn't it?
Yeah. It should come with a health warning. Yeah.
Having got cancer, and because I'm not sleeping properly, it's quite worrying. But, yeah.
And I guess as a person, someone that wasn't really on my radar until Comic Relief, I'd heard about his accident, and obviously his recovery is quite documented, but until you actually listen to him speak and watch how he's recovered from such an incident, is Billy Monger, the young racing driver who lost his legs in that awful accident a couple of years ago. The documentaries that have been on him, and I think please correct me if I'm wrong, was it Comic Relief, Sports Relief? I think it's Comic Relief. He went and did that amazing challenge, but he's on TV, he just seems like such a humble gentleman who his resilience up the yin yang. And he's probably someone, although it's quite easy, isn't it, to look at age and probably think, he's still got, that young man's got a very solid head on his shoulders. If we could take a couple leaves out of his book in any factor in our lives, I think we all be doing very well. You've got to have something to be able to deal with what he's dealt with at that age. And it's remarkable young man. Top chap. And last question, if anyone wants to get in touch, how do they do that? So I'm building at the moment. I'm getting into more and more keynote speaking. So if people would like me to come and speak to them, I talk about creating high performance cultures, and that's a range of stuff. We've only touched on brief stuff today, but selecting your team, how do you brief, execute, debrief, effective communication, how that can play a part in the workspace. So I either do that in one-to-one sessions, or I go in and talk to companies, or I've just set up a company with a business partner of mine called the Performance Hackers. And again, we use data, really. It's the same kind of electrical data that's put on Formula One drivers or Olympians to understand your sleep cycle, your stress cycle, where you can get that extra 1% out of your day. And we sit down with people and we design programs so they can design and develop their own habits to get, reduce stress, get that extra cool-headedness when they do. So for me, you can find me on LinkedIn, just under Dan Lowe's. You can find business partner Scott Radford. He's under there. Podcast is the Performance Hackers. Sorry to promote another podcast on yours, but if you're listening to this, please go and go elsewhere. And that's it, really. We're still building, so soon there'll be a website and an email. So just keep an eye out on the LinkedIn pages, and I'm on Dan Lowe's on Instagram if people are still on Instagram. So I'd love to see you. Reach out, ask questions. I'll answer as many as I can, because I've become, when we talk about losing that identity, I'm slowly finding it again in this world, and I'm loving getting involved with people. And it would be such a shame to leave a 17-year military aviation career where we've learned so much in terms of performance and working in dynamic environment for one result, which is to succeed. It would be such a shame to just close that book and move on. And if we can help anyone, just small nuggets of information, either grow, learn, develop, then that's I'm finding a real passion for that now. And so if anyone wants to reach out, ask questions, or get involved with getting some help, then please give me a shout. I'll be more than happy to help you.
Amazing. Dan, I think you are absolutely inspirational. I've loved having this chat. You've got so much energy. There's so much to take from that. Life lessons, the power of focus, performance, decompression. I think I will from now on, live my life by the credible, approachable, dependable mantra. Just so much to take out from that. So I really appreciate you taking the time.
Yeah, it's very kind of you. Again, thank you so much. Your questions were fantastic, and it's so nice. It's almost a chat. That was so easy. So thank you for making it easy for me. And look, if we can catch up again and have more chats in the future, it would be an absolute joy. So thank you again.
That will be a massive thank you to Dan, who I think is one of the most modest yet inspirational people we've had on this interview series, given the heights of his career. I hope you have taken as much as I have from his insights into, on the one hand, peak performance and the focus and commitment needed to achieve your goals, but on the other, the need to decompress, to relax, and the fact that we can't be at 100% all of the time. And in case you missed it, even though he reached such elite levels, he failed a lot. But his positive approach to dealing with those failures is a fantastic lesson for us all. As always, if you enjoyed the interview, please like it, share it, and subscribe to the 87% YouTube channel, and look out for the next episode of Life Happens coming soon.